Good morning and welcome back, everyone, to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Hello, welcome back. All right.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Happy Tuesday.
There we go. Good morning. Our session today, or session. I feel like I'm in a training class at this point in time. Today, our topic is all around Power BI adoption, and particularly off the Power BI adoption roadmap, we're talking about system oversight. How to know what people are doing with your Power BI environment, what monitoring features are there that are out there, and what does this look like for you, an admin of your environment? This is an article that comes from the Microsoft adoption roadmap. Super great article, very long, lots of reading in this one. So there'll be lots of things to talk about, discuss, and with this comes a lot of opportunity for tooling or things you could build to help you monitor your Power BI environment. This is going to be very relevant for those admins who have the control around what's going on in their environment. Let's talk the news. So let's go jump into the news here. Any news items or any worthy news items we should talk about here as well?
Guys,
kick us off.
Yeah, officially now it's officially official. Data sets are now semantic models. We've talked about this a little already, but now on the Power BI blog by our very good friend Christian Wade, data sets have been renamed to semantic models.
Everywhere. No longer
Everywhere.
a data set.
Yes.
Yep. So
Stop your
clicky
training.
clicky semantic model is now a thing.
It's a great t-shirt.
It's gonna be a thing.
clicky, right? You know, it's fitting that Christian was the one that posted this, because I think throughout the years, every conversation he always started was like the data set. Well, the semantic model, right? Like, so he always had to say it anyway.
That's true. That's very true.
Now it's just, we're all talking the same language. So I wonder, in all reality, if he drove this change.
Maybe. I think on a Twitter thread, I was joking around with him. He said, "Hey, it's announced. It's a semantic model now." And I'm like, "Okay, cool." And I said, "Well, now we have clicky semantic model." He made the joke, and he goes, "That's the official name of it. That's actually the real."
Okay. That's what we call it in-house.
But also, I think someone on that chat thread that he had thrown out there, someone was mentioning like it's probably just going to get abbreviated down to the model. So people will drop the word semantic, and when you're talking about it in like write-ups or documentation, you're probably going to see the semantic model, and now you're going to look at it and going just calling it the model. Actually, I honestly, I already call it the model already, and I don't call it a data set. I call it the data model.
Yeah, it's a great point. I've never called it the data set.
I've never called it a data set.
When I'm talking about the model, we deploy the model, and then you're interacting with the model, and it's like, so I'm happy they actually made the change.
Yes.
Because to his point, even in the blog, can you imagine that conversation in the Fabric ecosystem? Well, if create the data set, just connect to that. Which one?
Where?
One? Well, the data set in this area. Well, how does that compare to the data set in that area? Like, it doesn't.
The default data set? Which data set are we talking about? So it definitely makes more sense. We've had some customers also starting to build out things inside Fabric, but it's getting very interesting because the business. I've been saying this for a long time now. Fabric is a great move for the business user. The business user can do so many more things now in areas they're comfortable with. Yeah, they may know a little bit of SQL. Yeah, you might want to write some views. But man, does it make it very easy for you to like at scale with lots of data, copy things, do transformations, mature these data tables. I mean, man, these are tools. And I was trying to work this through with the client. They're like, "Oh, what is Fabric? Why is it all?" Dude, literally, nothing's changed from a Power BI side. We still have data sets.
Yeah.
We still have reports. All that is the same. So how we share and distribute content, no issue. All we've done is we've added, like, instead of doing just Power Query on the back end to shape data, we now have like 10 things to shape data.
Yeah.
And they all kind of work together in like a very interesting dynamic way. So I really like this new story around Fabric. And I think I've liked the Synapse and Power BI story before. And now that they've just kind of killed Synapse and moved all those things over to Power BI directly, making it much easier for me to spin stuff up, man, I really like it.
Well, so here's the question: in the Lakehouse, it creates a default data set.
Okay.
Which is kind of, is now that a default semantic model?
Yes.
Okay,
It would have
that
to
would also be.
default semantic model that sits on top of the lake. Things are still interesting, and I've been challenged with some things like questions around like there are some features that are still in Power BI, the old, like Power BI original, like data flows,
Mhm.
data flows Gen 2. How's that going to kind of you can still use them in both places,
Mhm.
but now it's a little bit confusing for users because they're like, well, which one should I be using? I have this thing called a data mart, but I also have this thing called a warehouse. So which one should I be choosing? They seem to do a lot of the same stuff.
I wonder too if the name, and this is kind of a roundabout analogy here, but of the it sounds like almost like a downgrade to what we consider the data set. I'll Steve Jobs, when he came with iCloud, he said, "Oh yeah, your computer used to be the hub. That's where all your stuff came in. Well,
Hmm?
we're downgrading the computer, and we're just calling it the PC. And now you have the cloud. That's where everything connects to. Data set's been so powerful for us. That's been the center of our universe.
Yep.
Semantic model, it's like, okay, it sounds like just another cog in the giant fabric wheel now. Is it still the centralized point of everything we do?
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying. There is, let me restate what you said, how I understand it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here.
Usually works.
You're wrong.
There is a large amount of gravity around the thing called the data set because that was the central item where everything hung off of the data set.
Yeah.
Right? With Fabric, we now have a full lake house with lots of tables in it. So we have a data set with lots of tables in it. When you connect to things, I'm always connecting to the data set previously. Now I'm connecting to the data set and maybe the default data set and maybe pulling out some data from lakehouse tables. There's potential for, other areas around here that are like the gravity of just the importance of just the data set is not as important,
Right.
because now there's other things in there that are maybe as important, maybe more important than what the data set was doing. Is that maybe
Our
your point there?
world no longer revolves around the data
Just
model.
the data set. Yes.
Right.
And I would agree with you. I think the answer is yes. I think this is what, remember, man, as I think about the progression of what Power BI has done, it started with here's easy to build reports. Here's easy to build and share data sets. That was our initial foray. So we had to like work with IT or work with central, tech to get those tables into like a data flow maybe, or get them into the data model. So that was where our world began. Our world began with the relationships, the semantic model, and then the reporting. What we've now added is we've added one layer deeper, closer to where traditional IT tools would be focused. Right? We've gone upstream even further and said, okay, now you can engineer your own data. Here's a rich set of tools that IT is already using or should be using. Now, business, you can use it too.
Mm-hmm.
We've pulled the veil, we've pulled the line back further, closer to where raw data can live, which I think is a great decision. Anyways,
Yeah, I agree with that as well. I think the mental shift for business is, I guess, going to be one where like you could already do transformations. You could already connect to different sources, but
yes,
like you had a limited set of tools that were specifically designed and narrowly focused to just populate models.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now, I think Fabric also opens the door, which is also going to challenge business, I think, to some degree, where you are lighting up those different tool sets that allow you to do the same things: extract data, transform it, load it. However, I think now with these other tool sets, these are enterprise tool sets that you can get a lot more reusability out of, I think, and scale with. Right. And I think
Yes.
that's what it offers above and beyond the tooling that was created to solve those problems in the Power BI ecosystem itself. Now you can start to solve those problems across those different services within this new ecosystem. So I think it's definitely a step in the right direction, but yes, we'll challenge, how business understands this thing that they're probably just adopting within the last year or two, right? And now, getting thrown into the mix of, welcome to the new way technology is created, right? We're launching new products every 5 to 10 years.
Very true. And I think this also the direction of Fabric going aligns very well with Matthew Roach's maxim, which is transform the data as far upstream as possible and as far downstream as necessary. So this really does give the business more power to shape the data earlier in the process, which makes things way more efficient downstream. So this really does fit the pattern, I think.
I also like it because I think it offers more opportunities to solve the quick business problems as opposed to pulling it into these streams of tool sets that we had to prior.
You know, I already have a topic episode I just added to our board. It's going to be, do we need Fabric? Because I mean, with all of this, I'm just constantly thinking about the downgrade of the semantic model, the downgrade of the normal workflow. Like, I wonder if that's still going to exist. Can you survive with just Power BI in general? Can you survive with just the semantic model and data flows? Or do we need Fabric now?
I mean, I don't think there's an immediate need to migrate, and I don't think Microsoft is saying that in any place. It's just, this is a new type of service that incorporates Power BI, and it's not removing any of the capabilities of Power BI.
No, and that's the crazy thing too.
We know that Power BI works very well in those ecosystems.
Yeah.
I think this just takes it to the next level. You may never have to integrate or engage with the large scale services behind the scenes, and you may just keep your Power BI instance the way it's rocking right now. Like,
sure,
it's not like you have to incorporate all of this into your work streams. It's just
exactly
the fact that it's there is really key. It's really cool because data volumes are just growing. They're not getting smaller.
That was one epiphany I had like 6 years ago when I was working in a big Fortune 150 company.
Yeah.
They kept saying like more data is being generated, and like doggone it, now more than ever. I'm like, yeah, it is, and it's becoming easier and easier. My opinion on this one is when people started making, or when organizations started using the application protocol interface APIs everywhere, like, and this whole idea or this concept around a microservice showed up. Do something small, but do it really, really well. Mm-hmm. All these features of the internet now that the internet is getting cheaper to run, it's less cost for internet speeds. Speeds are going up very high. When you bring down the cost and you bring up the speed of internet, you have so much more innovation that can be happening. Things can happen at a much higher speed and rate. So this is where innovation comes from. So this is really exciting for me because I really feel like we're in a place right now where the data volumes are going to be ever increasing. It's going to keep getting, there's going to be more and more devices making more data. You're going to have to get smarter and smarter how you manage your information. And this is the new methods by which we can cheaply aggregate and work on top of large amounts of data.
Cool. I don't know a lot, but here's one thing I do know. I have about 2 weeks of half-day training coming up. There's a lot of slides I have to change now.
Mm-hmm. For Fabric.
Yeah.
Very true.
Right now, just for semantic model.
Oh, yeah, true.
Even if I was on a Power BI island, I have a lot to change.
That's true. Very, very true. One other article here from a news perspective is another news article here found from Gary. This is on LinkedIn, so it's a little bit harder to get. You have to be signed into LinkedIn to see this one. But this is from Gary talking about, hey, let's imagine you have a chargeback model, right? So a chargeback model, for those who are not understanding this, is you have a large Fabric instance running and you have many different teams looking at that Fabric instance, and you need to understand, okay, each team is using a certain amount of CUs, capacities on this stuff. So how do you identify which team members or which workspaces are using what information? So Gary wrote a nice little statement here, and he was using it through PowerShell, but I believe you can also use this through Semantic Link as well. When you connect to the XML endpoint, you can run this query against it. I believe also the API that would let you write queries against the XML endpoint, this should potentially work there as well. But in here, he defines, go grab the capacity ID, grab all the metrics by item and by operational day, and then grab today -1 information. So grab yesterday's information, and then you can store it. So I have a monitoring solution for organizations already that has been built to help you monitor all the APIs that Microsoft provides you. But in addition to that, this is a great another addition. And this is another area where you could say, look, I need to know which CUs are being used across which team. This is the end of that, a chargeback model, or being able to see what compute is being leveraged by a capacity is huge. So this will be very easy to integrate in people's solutions. But I want to point this one out as well as we think about system oversight, governance, Power BI. This is a really important area to focus on because these are the kind of data points that we'll need. And I would 100%, I mean, if you're a bigger team in Power BI, if you're thinking about buying premium capacities, dude, man, do not start your Power BI journey without having some sort of monitoring in place before you even begin. It is you wouldn't drive your car blind. You shouldn't run your Power BI without monitoring. Plain and simple. It should just go hand in hand at this point.
So you're saying system oversight in Power BI is important?
Well, let's transition to our
Well,
main
it's a
topic
good thing we're talking about that today.
And they're in there. So everyone has a good article there around a cool statement you can run against XML endpoints. With that then dovetails very well into our main topic for today, which is talking through all of our system oversight pieces and Power BI, how this is going to work. Let's talk about that and the article that came out from Microsoft. Tommy, kick us off with some initial thoughts.
Man, so system oversight, just a brief background. It is ongoing day-to-day admin activities. According to Microsoft, there's 3 key areas that go into system oversight or that it's concerned with: governance, user empowerment, and adoption. I find it interesting it took those 3 areas, but it's really all the administration tasks. You think of the admin portal, we think of licensing, we think of enablement, what people have access to. But it's also the features that people have availability for, but it's also how people get access to certain technological pieces. How do I get access to a workspace? If I need a new workspace, what do I do? And so it's all those areas. And this is the one where there's a very delicate dance between, we have IT controlled, we want the control around certain areas, but we also don't want disillusionment, we don't want frustration. I've been actually saying quite frequently with someone who's going through this right now, that people will go through, and this is a Mike quote, but people will always go the path of least resistance. And it's always true. So yeah, we do want to restrict a lot of the features maybe initially, but you can't restrict things that people are, I don't want to say expected to do, but are part of their roles. So that's really where I think this conversation may go today, is that delicate balance.
So I'm also thinking here, so another area of this, again, talking high level here, right? This is one of the roles that are or skills that need to be handled at a Power BI level, right? So there's many different skills that make up people who need to interact with Power BI.com. People who consume reports, people who make reports, people who build semantic models now, and data engineering, right? And then there's this concept of the admin. I think there's a very clear skill set around being an admin of Power BI, the tenant, because you need to know where to look for information, how to get that information, and how to work with users. And to kind of lean on this a little bit, when you get into the tenant settings of your organization, someone needs to make decisions around, can anyone create a workspace? Who can export data from where? Is a certified data set allowed to be exported? Can I build on top of a certified data set? There is so much flexibility in the Power BI ecosystem. The admins should be working with business leaders as part of the CoE, figuring out what these policies should look like. And I'm a firm believer of turn off a lot of things for many users. However, I would never really turn everything off for all users. There's usually scenarios or situations where, with proper training, with the right understanding between those business users and what you're creating, yeah, we do want to let some users create workspaces. That's probably acceptable. But what are the bounds by which we want to play with that group? Who's allowed to make stuff and export data from things? What does that look like? And let's talk with those individuals and make sure they understand why and what they're exporting, so we understand there's policy around what that means. But this is where I think organizations fall down, is they don't have policy, they don't have planning for this, and they just blanket turn everything off, and users get frustrated.
Yeah, you definitely see how that would happen, but at the same time, like if you're promoting limited access, I think one of the things the article does describe well is making sure that you have in a central location a output of tenant settings or how
Yes.
you're managing the tenant, so that like one of two things happens. One is somebody knows that they could request access to something.
Hmm.
One, and two, knows what's on by default.
Yes.
Because I think the point that it
Agree.
makes and really well is people, we're asking business users, a lot of them, to scan the web, try to understand like what are the capabilities that they can use, and they're gonna run across things that
Hmm.
are going to point them in the direction of, I know you've turned this off, like, and if you've
Yes.
turned it off and I need it, I'm gonna go figure out how to do that without you, which is exactly what you don't want.
Yep.
One of the interesting points to me, though, is like you talked about Power BI administrator, right? Managing those tenant settings. This is elevating that, and I wonder, does the Power BI admin need to skill up because of the new Fabric services that they may not be familiar with? Because what this is promoting is a Fabric administrator would be the one that would manage the tenant settings now, because there's more capabilities that users can use, most definitely in the engineering services and spaces within the workspace. So is that one and the same kind of person?
I don't know yet, because with the admin portal right now, there's only 2 features right now available in the admin portal that affect Fabric directly. Turn Fabric on or off, and I think it's creating a Fabric capacity or a trial. Those are the only 2 things right now in the admin portal that really affect what someone can do. There's no admin settings around data engineering, turning certain, like turn notebooks on for certain users, or the ability to create a lake house, right? So from a Power BI admin, like there's been more features added, but nothing around Fabric.
So this is a name change, realistically, at this point.
Right now, it's named
and stay up to date on the new Fabric tenant settings. But you're now the Fabric administrator. You're not the Power. You're not just the Power BI administrator.
Yeah, I think we'll see in the upcoming 6 months. I can't imagine not that we're going to have an addition, either a Fabric portal, like another tab, or it's just going to be more features added to the admin portal, just for all those little Fabric capacity or Fabric features. But right now, if you're a Fabric admin, you're not Power BI admin with 2 Fabric features added.
Yeah, I do think like I was extremely pleased, well, disappointed and then pleased, I guess, because tenant settings used to be all on or all off.
Yes.
And with the addition, and it was a long time, with the addition of the ability to do that for groups, I think
Security groups, yes,
was much needed, and I'm glad is there, because there is limited scope to this kind of stuff that you want to enable or disable within an organization. Have you guys ever, when they're talking about the roles or the different administrators now, have you ever like worked with an organization where you would need multiple administrators? Because the ones broken down within here are premium capacity, right? Like the licensing, which maybe, right? Gateway administrator, like, okay, like if you have tons of online, or on-premises data sources or things that require gateways, I could manage. Imagine that would be quite the ordeal to manage, right? And then workspace is kind of, I think that falls off into, you own the workspace and you can do some things. But have you ever seen more than one, or is it just like a combined role of different roles within the same person?
The only separation I've seen is with the gateway, not so much with the admin side. Usually the gateway, if it's on a virtual machine, is controlled by IT. But they might not have any I don't want to say intellect, but any knowledge or experience in Power BI. They just know, hey, we need to install something on your virtual
service
machine. Yeah, we're at your beck and call.
Yeah, so I would say the gateway is a good breakpoint of someone else who's managing something separate, because it's on hardware that's not necessarily controlled by Power BI. I mean, that's even a potential on-prem lockdown type of hardware that normal BI users shouldn't be doing that. However, I'd also say once the gateway is installed, then it's a matter of who's allowed to build connection strings on the gateway, and how are you allowed to delegate that to users of various reports. So I think there's a portion there. I definitely think admin and premium, particularly when premium gets up to the level of a large organization where you have multiple premium instances, usually there's someone who's in charge of working through, let's continue to optimize or make sure we have ears listening to what's going on in the premium capacity. Multiple premium capacities require someone to monitor what's going on there because users do very interesting things and you find very heavy usage and you're going to get the, why is my report failing? I'm getting these messages. Something's not right.
Yeah.
And it's caused
It's
by
broken.
it's broken. It's not broken. You have a data set you're trying to upload that's too large, or there's too much contention in the backend refreshing on your premium. So you need to stagger. Everything can't refresh at midnight. Like you have to stagger it a little bit, right? So there are things that you need to kind of be considerate of when you're looking at the premium. So I would say those two pieces are very much different. There's also this idea of, and I teach this one as well with my classes. There's this concept around there should be potentially some of this work administration that you can offload to a ticketing company, a ticketing central IT something, a service ticket area.
Yeah.
For example, you could have policies around requesting workspaces. You may not let anyone create them, but you probably do need a policy around communicating like, hey, if you want to go get one, here's your business case and we need someone to approve it. So there's lots of what I would call low-hanging fruits around admin and monitoring and management of more of the artifacts. And my story here is having a clear plan on when you are exchanging ownership of something is very important. And when you draw diagrams of the data sets, and now with the lake, Fabric Lakehouse, Fabric warehouses,
What's a data set
default
like?
semantic models.
Okay.
I'm trying
I
to.
didn't know what a data set was. So.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm using the wrong terms for you. So in that phase, right, when you're talking about those different things you're now trying to manage, right, delegating this to other people, you're now drawing boundaries between here's my semantic model, here's a report you made, Mr. Business User. There needs to be a transition of ownership. I'm going to own the data set, semantic model, and you will own the report. So to me, that's very important to communicate where those responsibility boundaries occur. And from a planning perspective, this means you have to think more about your workspace design because workspace really is the mechanism by which we hand off ownership to somebody else.
There's a few things being said here that I think we cannot be not underutilized, but underrated in terms of the importance. And this is coming from someone who became an admin at a new organization adopting Power BI when it first came out, then coming into one where it was already a Wild West. And that's the need. We talked about the roles and having a team for whether it's for a request or the backup. Fun story. I was basically the admin of all, so to speak, of the admin portal, the gateway, you name it. Was on vacation, went to a distillery, had a great time. Turned out one of the virtual machines where the gateway was on that I owned was down. And this is early on. And very quickly, you're trying to, tax fix or, go through an audit what's going on when you're already a few whiskeys in. Tasting, of course, which can be a problem. And then very early, the need, even if a lot of organizations only have like one admin, administrator for the tenant or even the capacity. It's like, well, they know everything, but having that team that at least has the knowledge and more importantly, the privilege to go through and fix, edit, or update is huge. And I think that cannot be understated. They don't have to necessarily be the owner, but you do have to, I think, have a team to at least train to also have the privilege to go in and edit.
I think Joe potentially touches a little bit on your question here, Tommy, around this one. Joe is asking a question. If you have multiple capacities in different business units, should you have different admins? I think this is a great question. And I'm going to give kind of two answers around this one. It kind of what I think you're speaking here too a little bit, Tommy, is if you have multiple capacities across different business units, I say follow the money. If the business unit is paying, seriously, if that business unit is paying out of pocket for a P1 and they need it for their stuff, for their reporting, they should admin their own stuff. It should follow the money. So they should be able to control what goes on there. They should be able to control aspects of the performance of that premium capacity. Conversely, if you have a central team that's paying for these BI initiatives and the business unit is quote unquote borrowing that premium, I think the central team should own the reporting around how performant is that capacity running and helping those business units optimize. That's just following the money portion. I think there's a second question you must ask yourself is, if you give a business unit a premium capacity and they are paying for it, do they have the skills to actually manage that premium capacity? And that's not always the case. And that's usually where there's not enough education done. So day one, probably no. That might have to be helped. You might have to help manage it from a central team. But over time, I would hope that you're investing in someone in that business unit to actually become familiar with premium, and you slowly relinquish more control to that premium capacity, especially if they're paying for it.
So let's go through the scenario then. That Fabric, the capacity administrator, what do they control? Do they control the creation of workspaces in their domain?
They control who can put that workspace in premium.
Okay.
On their premium, right? Because if I'm paying for my premium, I don't want other teams trying to use my premium for their projects.
But they also control how many workspaces, whatever workspaces are in there. And if they do have a workspace in their capacity, let's go through the scenario too with the documentation. This is user empowerment, governance, and culture. Do they also control the content, or are they overseeing who the workspace owners are? They're controlling their domain. So they're controlling workspace owners and admins.
So
right?
here,
you see where I'm going with this.
I agree with your statement. I think if you're going to pay for the premium, that's the admin portion of this one.
Sure.
They also need to identify, okay, again, this is the whole story around how do I exchange responsibility to somebody else? If you're going to have responsibility of these multiple workspaces, the Center of Excellence team should come up with the policy around how does this work inside a team. The central team should say, look, we're going to say one admin, one member, everyone else contributors, because then we know who is responsible for that workspace. So, for example, there's an admin of the capacity, something's going wrong. There's a workspace you find that has a report in it that's just doing super bad things. Someone's just dumping tons of data out through Excel, and it's just hogging the capacity. That's going to happen. So the point here is, by knowing where that report lives, and by knowing why it's taking down the system, you can now reach out to the owner, the member of that resource group, and say, hey, there's a problem here. You're making issues. Please fix it. If you need help, we can come in and fix it. But the policy of what that looks like, how the teams play well together, that is defined centrally. Doing it is actually, I think, implemented in the business unit. Does that make sense?
It totally does. And I think it's also one of those grow up stories, depending on the size of the organization, right? Like it probably, like in smaller orgs, or orgs that have one P1, right? It's probably gonna come out of the center, the main business intelligence team. As your organization grows, or the adoption of Power BI gets much wider, right, and used more within business units, does it make sense that business units start to spool up their own premium capacities and have their own administrators? Absolutely. But they all should be following the same guidance, which is where that CoE policies and those things come into play, where the experts of understanding not only Power BI and its architecture, but the data and the systems and the things can make recommendations to those teams and say, this is how you want to administrate it. These are the default settings that we're going to set in the tenant. This is how you should apply these things, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I think a consequence of having the different capacity administrators without the CoE, and I think without the emphasis on the CoE, is you can have all these capacities with very different cultures and very different user experiences.
So I would not say you should have multiple administrators in different capacities all doing random things in your organization.
Totally.
That is a recipe for disaster.
And yes, someone may be, but the idea is you're trying to build empowerment, but we're also trying to do it in a way that scales across the entire organization. And this is why I think it's most important to think about, okay, when we're talking about system oversight, particularly around capacities, you got to have all those leaders. Hey, part of the game we're playing here is You want your own premium? Sure, no problem. But you will participate in the Center of Excellence. We will have quarterly meetings. We will define policy centrally. You need to have input in that. And from that input, again, part of the playing well with the ecosystem here is it's a give and take relationship on both sides. You get your premium, but we're going to set up these kinds of policies and we're going to make sure you're following those things. And we're going to agree upon what that looks like from a central standpoint.
Yeah, and I think just noting some of those centralized standards is who can create a workspace. Have they gone through prerequisite training? Are they using templates on their reports? Assigning those roles from the workspace on like not just the contributor and member, but who's owning in a sense the content, right? Because if you have multiple capacities, odds are you're probably in some type of managed self-service or some obviously enterprise type of workflow. We just had our conversation about managed self-service. So there has to be part of that governance too. But then there's the other side of that. The other side of that is, again, that the adoption and also how do you actually then grow users in the organization? How do you grow users to become either champions or new Power BI authors?
Yes. Yeah. And some people are going to automatically just do this. Other people are not going to find the value in taking the time to study and grow and become that expert that you need them to be, right? So now it becomes a matter of, okay, how much of this am I just collecting them what's already there? Or how much of this am I actually having to push people to go beyond what they're currently comfortable with and becoming more data savvy? Like, I mean, a lot of people say Excel does everything I need to do. I literally just read an article yesterday that talking about JP Morgan Chase had a $6 billion error because one of their Excel sheets had a sum versus something else that was calculated. And when data was copied between two sheets, when someone was making some sort of analysis, there was an urgency on the business to move quickly. People were trying to check the Excel sheet, and the decisions were being made on top of that Excel sheet in a way that caused someone to make a mistake, and it was a problem. I get that you want to move fast as a business. I understand. But to make a $6 billion mistake because someone didn't do something right in the Excel sheet is a huge boon. And this was an article that's touted that says, look, for very important decision-making pieces, you need to have more rigor around it than just someone looking at an Excel sheet. And I've worked in companies that have been billions of dollars in size, and we made major decisions based on someone's work inside an Excel sheet. Not saying it doesn't. I would say Excel probably runs many, many businesses and making very key decisions, but there's a high level of risk that employ.
One quick question around the multiple capacities and multiple administrators, and I know there's so many other things in here. What are universal standards across regardless of capacity, regardless of the area, and what are things that are more capacity owned or like subgroup owned? So by that I mean, I would imagine that creating an app, having a workspace administrator, those are all universal standards. Who can create a data set, who can create a report, their training, those are universal organizational standards. What things do you imagine are more dependent on each capacity or dependent on each kind of subdomain of the organization?
Well, I think there's areas of this, like, so we should think about like where, again, I always think about who do I want to control what things, right? Like tenant settings, that's tenant wide. Like there's some settings that are across your entire organization. So like information protection, data loss prevention, right? These are features that come with Power BI that are just globally set. Do you want to invite external guest users to your tenant or not? There are some large decisions that have to be made at the organization level to say, do we care about this one? Like another one here is, where do you want the data to reside? Do you have any policies across the organization? Like, do you have a division in Europe? They have different data policies than you do over in the US. So you might need a capacity that turns on for all workspaces in Europe because you need to localize data in that. There's like literally legal implications around your data pieces that you might need to consider. Encryption keys, right? These are things. Do you encrypt your data and do you hold your own keys, or do you let someone else, let Microsoft do it for you? Those are the key decisions I would say that are very centralized and that need to come from that center of excellence team, that central team. A lot of this other stuff around workspace management, some of the smaller pieces, I think is a lot more. You can delegate that. And again, it's just about making sure there's a policy in place that says, I'm handling this responsibility to you. You are now responsible for this one.
Yeah, I would almost, I agree with you, Mike. I think the only additional comment I would make is those core security area things, or where people could potentially get themselves in trouble or would go against the data standards of an organization, how we operate within them, are I want to centralize as much as possible and put through governance processes, right? And that's like controlling the big pieces. Where I'm open to like allowing others to manage other aspects would be in the performance realms, where you have to monitor things that people are doing, otherwise you're gonna spool up all your costs. Like there's a cost component in there that like you could say is obviously important to an organization, but it's not like we're gonna have somebody accidentally publish their report of financial numbers to publish the web, right? Like that's a big versus somebody just published a report and it's consuming 25% of the capacity. We should probably solve that or understand and work with them how to mitigate that performance issue, because it's going to impact others within the organization. So like I'd delineate around those two as far as like opening up additional permissions for other people to manage.
Did that answer your question, Tommy?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the documentation talks about like the centralized or decentralized management. And I think you're right. Like this goes back to me, the CoE. This goes back to the kind of the larger conversation on how this is delegated top down.
And I think this is a movie. This is a sliding scale too. In the beginning phases of Power BI, usually a lot of this stuff is already centralized. It's a very centralized team. It's a small team. It's 2 or 3 people. There's maybe one, and this also happens too. I find this a lot when I work with people in companies. The people that I invest in, the people that I work with to train around things of Power BI, they have a natural progression. And I've seen this occur multiple times in multiple businesses. When you learn Power BI, you become an expert in it. The expert finds value. The value is then distributed to other people in the team. You get more responsibility. You continue to grow. And what happens is those initial, very passionate, I call them Power BI champions, they get promoted or they move into roles that are more interesting to them, where they do more management around Power BI. So they actually become your first layer of, initially it was one person only managing everything. That person gets promoted into a position where they get a different boss. They move up a level. They're now owning the entirety of Power BI, the ecosystem. And now other people are trying to be educated around what it's doing, how to use it. So there's this natural progression. And I've seen many people change careers. I've even told people, you've outgrown your company. You have more. The company culture, the data culture in this company is not allowing you to be successful in Power BI because they're not having the right kinds of conversation around governance, deployment, administration, and rolling it out. You've basically outgrown them. You need to go find a different company that has a better data culture.
I want to touch on that organic growth that you're talking about, because I think it's, I don't want to say not as easy as that, but because of turning on and off features. And one of the big parts in the documentation talks about common questions asked by confused and frustrated users.
Yes.
Why can't I create a workspace? Why can't I export data? Why can't I certify a data set? And I think, yes, absolutely, that happens at organizations, but it's not a guarantee if you don't allow for certain features to be enabled, or kind of depending on the data culture, but also depending on systems that are enabled, because you want that, to what Mike exactly said, you want that at organizations to have that organic growth of people learning on their own, having their own skill set grown, where they're not either like, hey, you're going to be a Power BI person now. We want this to be organic. We want people to find out, but that's not a guarantee just because you turn on Power BI. So what's the balance then? If you have a lot of features turned off and you want this organic growth, to, in a sense, foster that kind of environment. But again, we're turning off a lot of things. So how do we balance the two?
Well, I think first one is education, first and foremost. If you're turning off a lot of stuff, you need, so in any circumstance here, whether it's a Teams channel that you're chatting across, whether it's a SharePoint site, it's a Confluence page, I don't care what it is. It doesn't matter what it is. Everyone needs a central place to put down information and details about what's going on. And I do think as a centralized team, again, it usually starts as one person, but it grows typically to more people as the thing becomes more adopted. You need to have a place where you're saying, here are the key settings we've turned on or off. Here are our key policies. And for everything you're turning off, you need to at least describe, like, for example, publish to web is a good one because everyone I think is very black or white on this topic. Turn it off or have it only on for a sub-selection of groups. Whatever that policy is, as you agree upon the organization, you need to document, hey, there's this feature called publish to web. We have turned it off for this reason. Ding, 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 ding. Done. Then no one asks for it. And when someone says, hey, I can't find this feature published to web, you can literally point them to the URL or the link that says, here's that feature, here's the setting, here's what we've determined as an organization as to why it's on or off. Now, if you want to keep publish to web on, you need to have a policy in place that says, okay, to get this feature, you need to do this, this, and this. Like, for example, workspace is another one. I can't create workspaces. Yes, that's by design. But here's what we need you to go through in order to delegate that permission to you. You need to go through this training. You understand how our company is expected to share data and what the responsibilities of that look like. So that way, when I do hand you a workspace or I do let you create them, we have a policy around, hey, this workspace hasn't had any data set refreshes in the last, or semantic model refreshes in the last 6 months. We're gonna mark your workspace for deletion. Like, we're gonna get rid of stuff. We can't think of everything just being created and nothing ever getting turned off. That's not a good idea. We have to plan the full life cycle. So there has to be some more planning around those particular tenant settings. Document what your decision is and document how you get access, or if you're not going to give access at all. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So without that touch point, I think you lose a lot of the organization and they just get frustrated. Why can't I export this data?
Yeah, I think what you're pointing out, Mike, is it's important to go through the exercise for all the tenant settings.
Yes.
And I would kind of look at it in a different way, Tommy, not necessarily like, well, if we're going to apply all these tenant settings, like what we're going to kill the user experience. Like, no, I think you're viewing those tenant settings in the mind that you want people in the organization to use, be able to, and grow without getting themselves in trouble. What are the things that are going to get themselves in trouble? Those are going to be the call outs that, hey, here's Power BI. Here's the things that, you automatically have access to. Here's our central document that says you can have access to these 5 other things. All that requires you to do is submit this thing or go through this whatever, because we need you to understand how to use that object within the system. That's fair. Like, you're giving them a path for success. I think what's important here is you don't just say, hey, we have system oversight, we've made these decisions, and then not communicate anything.
And
right?
I think, yeah. And I want to take potentially a different angle here. I know the question on, like, what do you turn on and off, or what do you enable or not? If you have an organization pretty already utilizing it, I am more and more on the process or the project of cross communication. If you have champions, we've had a podcast episode on identifying champions, identifying people who are already in the weeds. And if you're not getting communication from them on what's frustrating and what's not working, I don't think you're going to have an effective form of system oversight. Another thing I love from the documentation is, hey, if you're seeing something that you don't want to happen, don't resist the urge just to turn it off. Like, if you're seeing a lot of data exports happen, that doesn't mean, oh, we need to turn it off because that's not what we want. Well, before disabling it, well, why is that occurring? And you need to hear from the trenches. You need to hear from your champions and your leaders in the area. Well, why is that occurring? Is there something that we need to redesign? Is there data that's not available for the Power users or the Power BI authors that's not allowing them to do so? Without having, and I don't want to call them beta testers, but I kind of do at the same time too, is having these people we've identified who are in the trenches, who are kind of the people I trust, who are not administrators.
Mhm.
They may not even necessarily be workspace owners or admins, but they are the people who are creating the most reports, getting the most shares. They're the Power BI gurus who I am going to promote in some way where they're going to beta test items, and I'm going to hear from them. I'm going to hear, what are they frustrated with? What are they enjoying? What do they need? Because at the end of the day, what I'm turning off and on, yes, needs to come from the governance and committee, but at the same time, needs to come from that user experience. If we're exporting data at an abnormal rate, it's because we don't have access to something in Fabric, or we don't have access to create composite models.
Mhm.
Well, that might be something we want to turn on, because that's what the organization needs. There's a lot of non-negotiable features like publish to web for most organizations that we're just not going to turn on. But I think there's a lot of other ones that's part of the data culture. That's part of how the organization has their process. I'm all for beta testing a group of users, allowing them to try features out, but more importantly, hearing from them on a consistent basis on what is working and what's not working, and have that as a very weighted part of my decision making from an admin point of view.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. Like, if there's anything that should be just a standard tagline and talk to the business, right? It's everything in business intelligence, right?
Mhm.
Like, we're actively either helping them or hindering them,
Yeah.
and with data, right? So the idea that this is an oversight committee that just sits in the background and makes these decisions is not the best way to approach it. And I think, like, the
Yes.
two different things you outline are, if you're in a scenario where you're just launching Power BI, like, in a formal scale throughout an organization, the conversation is pretty much easier, right? Like, you can rip through, you can take the experts, you can define the same things we talked about. Here's the tenant settings that we're allowing you to do. Here's what's on by default. Here's how do you get to tier 2. What you're proposing is, like, this stuff is already in the wild. Now we want to get our heads around it. That probably requires much more upfront conversations if people are using some of the features, right? With the data stewards or the people that are owners of data systems and reporting, because you want to implement, what you're implying is you want to implement some settings that aren't there. But yeah, it should always be a balance of between, like, if there's a particular need, great. Okay, that's a subset of people. We can stick them in this bucket. They still have access. The rest of the organization doesn't, right? But I would agree with your overall tone and point, which is, regardless of, how much monitoring we're doing within system, oversight, changes we're going to make, things we're going to disable because of actions, whatever is happening in the system, like, it always requires communication with the business unit, right? Like,
Totally.
that back and forth just
Yep.
has to be a natural part of the systems that you're creating and the administration oversight that you're providing.
Well, and I'll carry it further. The Power BI in the wild already existing compared to one you're launching. There's a very high chance that if you just launch that again, I think you need to identify those people, even if you're just launching Power
Yeah.
BI 2, because then
Yep.
it's like a chicken and the egg. Because how
I
are you
agree.
going to
I agree.
identify people if they don't exist yet?
One gripe I have with the documentation thus far is, I think in terms of the capacity management in usage, it only vaguely or briefly touches out Fabric capacities, which is kind of interesting, because it's this balance back and forth between, how does Power BI live in the Fabric ecosystem? But if you're going to change my overall administrator to Fabric administrator, then I think the Fabric capacity SKUs and things should be much more part of the conversation within here, even though it is Power BI. Like, I don't know. It was just something I noticed, and I was like, well, if it's not here, is there some other Fabric blog where it's like, talk about Fabric administrators, and this is where we talk about the FSKU and things like that.
I think that's partly because it's kind of, I'm not going to hold them at fault because of this.
Yeah.
Just because I think it's so new around this whole Fabric thing in general. I think people are still trying to get their head around. I mean, even still, like, if you look at the story around the administration in Power BI is not very strong from the Microsoft team. You can clearly tell they're focused on, we want to build things that are impactful for the business. We want people to use the program. Adminning and reporting and all this is all stuff that doesn't drive adoption. Like if you think about these things that we're talking about, if anything slows down or hinders
Could hinder it.
adoption.
Yeah.
So to have these things in place, like Microsoft is focusing on, and again, I agree with them. Like I think it's the right direction. Let's focus on making the best product that's usable to the business. And what we find, and what I find is a lot of the administration pieces of this are just kind of like thrown by the wayside. Like they give it to you, but it's not like a very refined experience. So I think there's definitely like a learning curve with like how to do this well so that you can get value out of the data that's being produced from Microsoft. They just haven't done a good job of this. They don't, and they're not. That's why. Why would you emphasize? If I have, to your point, Tommy, we do if I had $100,
I love
right?
Yes.
It's the same thing. Microsoft is like, look, I've got $100. I'm going to figure out where I'm going to put people, right? I'm going to put a portion of my money towards new visual development, updates like the visual team. I'm going to put money towards building new Fabric features. I'm going to put money towards fixing bugs. How many dollars are they thinking about spending? 5, 10, $1 around just the administration side of things? That's probably not a very big team relative to everything else they're trying to build at the same time.
And more importantly, the automation. I think maybe this may be a hot take, but I don't think a large organization can survive without utilizing the REST APIs. There's the kind of a block there about what you can do with it. And if you're a large organization or even a mid-sized organization, I don't think you can be entirely successful without utilizing that in part of your workflow. And not just the activity log.
I would argue differently there. You have a very centralized mentality around how you like to govern Power BI, which is not wrong.
Yes.
It's just a way. It's just a different way of thinking. I think there are other organizations who have taken very much a bottom up approach. Like I've seen organizations, and that is very much the decision of the organization.
Yeah.
But I would also argue a lot of organizations have said, look, just here's Power BI. Everyone's got an E365. Go have at it. What happens is you might not be doing things in the most optimized way, but people are finding value. People do find solutions. People do learn what's going on there. So even if you have that bottom-up approach, at the end of the day, you're adding value to the business. You're giving them capabilities they never had before. However, it's probably going to be a bit more expensive than if you started to try to centralize things and actually do things in an optimized way.
A bit.
There's going to be extra P1. There's going to be extra premium SKUs laying around that don't need to be there.
Right. So this is.
I don't know.
In the same way that we talk about IT and business, I think this is a direct example of like why an organization would want to put some thought in oversight and governance and understanding of what's going on in an organization, because 100%, you're right. You know who interacts and builds Power BI solutions without any oversight? Business people.
Yep.
Right. And that's okay.
Yeah.
The value is there, but there's going to be a threshold by which you are starting to hit technical limitations, and that costs money, right? And then the dollars start going cha-ching, cha-ching, P1 for you, P1 for you, P1 for you. And it's like, whoa, how are we spending this much money on Power BI? Where I think it's important that we put some oversight over this. It's like, yes, some forethinking and thought around how you want to structure the Wild West of allowing people to do whatever versus optimally using technologies. You know, it becomes a big deal at some point. So just start there instead. Don't be a blocker. Like, this isn't IT control everything. This is enable the business to operate in the way that business needs to, with some guidance and guardrails.
Yep.
And that's it.
And I think this changes again. This is never a single, wherever you're at on governance is just a starting point. There's usually more, you learn more things. The tool is going to continue to change. The technology is going to evolve. Your people will evolve. Your process will need to also evolve. So you need to start thinking about where do we start from and have a plan. I think this is one of our future episodes or past episodes. I can't remember anymore because we're recording things. But this is, think of your Power BI environment as a project as opposed to a product, right? It's going to continually evolve over time. It's not going to be this one and done thing. It's not. It's going to be this, and this is why I think we're in this space and why we love it. We have done something, just the three of us, we have invested time into something that we know is evolving and changing, and people need help with it. The fact that we're doing that is we're growing ourselves, we're growing organizations, and it's going to, I see the excitement from this is There's so many net new things that can be developed. This is like an untapped world of new ideas and concepts. And that really invigorates me to keep learning and be a lifelong learner around this stuff.
A whole new world.
There we go.
I love it. Good wrap up, Mike. I like it.
Excellent. So let's do final thoughts here. Quick final thoughts before we wrap the episode. Tommy, give us your final thoughts on this kind of conversation.
Planning is essential. All the things we're talking about today can be very overwhelming, but if you don't have the effective planning in place with the right people in that planning, this is going to be overwhelming from the start, and it's going to continue to be. Plan out, how does this look? Plan this with your COE, plan this with how this looks with adoption. You'll have a grasp on it.
Seth, what do you think? What are your final thoughts?
I echo those same things, right? Like system oversight, going through the adoption framework here, having a plan and an understanding of some of the scope that's going to come is going to save you your mental health down the road. Because when you open this up to the organization, or you start to implement these things within the organization, the volume of questions and people needing guidance are going to come. So if you didn't pre-plan and have answers to the things that you can cover a broad swath in, get ready for a rocky ride.
Yeah, I think I'm going to lean on just turn on premium for everyone. Just turn it all on. Open all the features up.
P1.
Final one. Yeah, everyone gets a P1. Here, everyone gets a P1. I will say just start. Right? It's not going to be perfect day one.
Yep.
Find people who are experts in this area. Have them help you learn and try and remove any initial potholes you may fall into. But you just need to start. You need to start working on management of this. You need to think about what works for your organization. I'd highly recommend focus your efforts initially on an executive sponsor who understands your vision. Focus on a center of excellence, a team of people that are going to, if it starts as one person, fine. If it starts with two people, no problem. Start small and grow from there. Take what you're learning and implement across the organization. And by all means, whatever you're learning, document it. Put it somewhere in a centralized place. Build a Teams channel. Build a SharePoint page. Start putting that knowledge you're learning down in some common area, because that adds more clout to your career. It adds more clout to what you're doing, and it will evolve over time. It doesn't have to be perfect day one. Figure out where you are and grow a little bit more each day. Excellent. With that, we really thank you for the conversation. Chat has been amazing. There's been so many great comments here. So thank you, chat, for jumping in and adding to the conversation today. This was wonderful. We really appreciate it. This is, what day is today? Thursday? Tuesday. Good. I was going to say something, and I don't need to say it now. So we're good to go. With that, we really appreciate your listenership. Please share this podcast with somebody else. If you found this conversation or topic valuable, and I know many for admin stuff, this is extremely valuable because nobody's talking about this in the space. Everyone's talking about these little tiny I'm going to govern this. This is a huge strategic conversation around here, around what we should be really focusing on. So please share with somebody else. Let them know you like this information, and hopefully they'll get something out of it too. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. I actually checked it out yesterday. We have 25 ratings on Apple, all 5 stars. Thank you so much. It helps us out a ton.
More ratings. Give us some more thumbs up.
And share it. Do you have a question, idea, or topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode? Head over to Power BI Tips/podcast. Leave your name so we can mention you and a great question. Finally, join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central, and join the conversation on all Power BI Tips social media channels.
He did that almost entirely one breath. Good job, Tommy.
That did not work.
All out of air now. I always knew, Tommy, you're full of hot air. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Have a great week, and we'll see you on Thursday.